Hey everyone, Brian Kelly here. Welcome to another episode of the Cultivate Church Planting Podcast. I hope you've been enjoying the show, and I want to tell you about an opportunity to support church planting and church planters. Go to cgn.org, click on donate. You'll see a drop down for church planting. I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but this is a great way to practically support the work of the ministry, support church planting, support church planters. We're going to see that all those funds go right out onto the field. So just wanted to tell you about that opportunity. And now let's get into the episode. All right, welcome to the Cultivate Church Planting Podcast. And I'm here with two outstanding fellows. Seth Allingham is here with us, and my good friend Nick Cady, who's been on the show before, co-hosting. And together we work with the Cultivate Church Planting program at CGN. And Seth is with us to answer some questions about finance and boards, church boards. Some real practical stuff, and Nick also has a lot of expertise. I've got a little bit, but I'm just going to mostly play host, and they're going to answer all the important questions. So welcome, Seth.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Seth just told me before we started, this is his very first time on a podcast. Is that true?
First ever.
Oh my goodness. And I told him, do whatever you do not mess this up. This is very important information. There are people out there, their churches depend on this. Okay?
No pressure.
And Nick, welcome back once
Thanks.
again. Thanks for being on the show. We're here at a little gathering in Camarillo, California, and just having some good time of fellowship, talking about ministry, excited about what's in store for CGN, Calvary Chapel, church planting. And as we were talking today, we were in a meeting, and Seth had so much wisdom to offer. I was like, you know what? The people need to hear this wisdom that you have. So, Seth, give us all the wisdom you have. Ready, Go. No, why don't you just tell us, where you're from, what you're doing, your experience with church planting, and we'll take it from there.
So I've been a pastor for, I don't remember how long, going on 20 years now. Started as a youth pastor and led a church for 10 years, assisting now, kind of done all the different roles, different variety of ways to serve in a church. And one thing that's always been on my heart was to marry best practices from the corporate world, the nonprofit world, with ministry. And it seems to me that ministry still lacks quite a bit in terms of financial literacy, being forward thinking in how you deal with money, how you think about money, and then also just unhealthy relationships with money management. And so I hope that in my ministry spheres that I can be a part of the solution for that and be a part of an advocate for us to do better, so to speak, as pastors and church leaders. And
well, when it comes to money, because I want to get back to a little bit more about who you are, because you've done some pretty cool stuff. But when it comes to money, especially within Calvary Chapel, and Nick, you can kind of chime in on this too, we've always been a little bit shy about it. We've kind of always been taught, we're not about the money, and we don't talk about the money and this and that. But it's interesting that money is brought up a lot of times in Scripture, obviously. And someone like yourself who has a financial background and has done it in the business world, I mean, it just comes to my mind like that passage where Jesus talks about, using unrighteous mammon for the kingdom.
Luke 16.
Yeah, so.
Well, there's also the parable of the talents, right? The servants who were given different amounts and did different things with it. And to me, that's very applicable to how we treat the resources God gives us. And I think it's one thing to live by faith, and that's important and fundamental to everything we're doing and everything we're teaching, right? But there's also the proactive, just daily obedience, the living out of our faith. And I think that needs to include a healthy relationship with financial management, whether personal finance or otherwise.
Yeah.
So you've planted a church before, and I know that there are kind of a couple different approaches people tend to take with church planting and money. Maybe could you tell us what was your approach, and do you think it was good? What are some approaches that people might take when it comes to this?
Good question.
Just for the record, especially in case they're listening, I assisted with a church plant. I came in about 6 months afterwards, but jumped right in,
and the finances just grew from there. It was amazing.
and it grew, but not that much. We were fortunate. They were fortunate before I got there to receive a small down payment, so to speak, on the church plant from the sending church. But it was small. It was mainly buying equipment and maybe $5,000. And so we started small. We started well within our means.
Where was the church plant?
Mill Valley, California, Marin County.
Yep. Okay.
So it's a wealthy area. That also means the cost of living is very high. And so the founding pastor worked several jobs to support himself while planting the church. And 3-4 years in was only really when he was able to get to a place of stability and be able to take a true salary from the church. It was actually 2 churches at that point, which is a story for another day. But
that's what you got to do in California in those neighborhoods. You got to plant 2 churches to survive.
And then he ended up turning the church over to me in year 5 anyway, and so it was kind of a different relationship anyway with the church finance. But we grew a little bit of a war chest, if you will, or a savings, and we all agreed, the church leadership, the elders, that would be there for emergencies. And so even though we started accruing more and giving than we were needing to fund the ministry, we wanted to build that up.
Okay.
To me, that's essential.
All right. And what kind of and I don't know if this is like a percentage thing or what, but would you say like make sure you have a certain amount in savings? Like what's some of your ratios that you worked with?
In my mind, and this is more just my and I just lost the word, but my non-ministry life. I'm bivocational.
So before you answer that, why don't you just go ahead and introduce that non-ministry life? What did you do in the financial world?
So I started out in nonprofit. I'm currently in city government, and so we have very strict controls over how money is dealt with. It's the residents, or the citizens' money, taxpayer money.
Yep.
And so it's very regimented and fine-tuned in terms of how we use it and the transparency behind it. And while some of it I think is maybe a little overdone, I think it's actually good.
Like the checks and balances and everything?
There's some good lessons to be learned.
Yeah.
And so that's my day job. And again, I've also worked with nonprofit boards, not just ministry boards, but fundraising, doing fundraisers, capital campaigns, things like that.
Okay. Yep. How do we raise money?
We go fishing and look inside the fish's mouth.
Yeah, I can look inside the biblical way. Yeah, but back to that original question of budgeting out kind of with your church. Like how did you go about doing that?
Every context is different. I think ideally you've got 25 to 50% of your yearly operating costs in the bank. And that sounds quite a bit, and it's not going to come at once. But especially as you start growing, and I'd say before you consider major expansions or major, capital intensive projects, you build that up. And to me, what that does is it ensures that you can continue to be transparent. You can continue to operate how you've been, and you don't get stuck, and you don't make poor choices because you're stuck or because you're in an emergency. And I think that would help a lot when you see layoffs and you see just
where churches overextend themselves and make commitments, and then for one reason or another, the giving isn't there like it used to be or whatever, and then they have to draw back on that.
Yeah, or even the temptation to start, preaching every sermon, talk about giving.
Oh, yeah.
Because that never happens.
Nick, what is that balance between walking by faith and then having that store of just savings and stuff?
Yeah, I'll just tell you a story. When I first came to the church that I'm pastoring now, they had some goals as far as savings go. And I think there is a balance that needs to be struck, because there was a time when it's like we had a goal. We met the goal, but then still a lot of the people who were in charge of making those big decisions, they were still reticent to spend money. And then there was a discussion of the parable of the talents, that we remember that these people, the ones who were found faithful, invested the talents that they had. But the one guy who was so afraid to spend anything, like that guy went to hell, and we don't want to do that. So I think there has to be a balance between.
It's a heavy board meeting.
Yeah, between being faithful with what we have, being smart, like so that we have something set aside, counting the cost so we know how much it costs to build a tower so we don't get halfway done. And then on the other hand, but also not being afraid to invest those talents.
Right.
So
Overly cautious. Yeah.
That's good.
Seth, in working, now I'm just curious about this personally, in working in government and seeing the financial, like kind of the side that we don't see as regular taxpayers, what are the similarities and differences between the church? Because you've been on both sides. Like, I'm just curious, what's the similarities, what are the differences, and what are some of the things you think, maybe some of the main things we could learn?
That's a good one. You have to pause for a second.
That's all right. I did. So just to clarify for our listeners, I didn't give them these questions ahead of time. That was a dirty trick by me. I'm like, oh no, it'll be easy. Don't worry about it. Just don't mess up. You're doing great, by the way.
Thank you. I need that. It almost sounds dumb to say, but everyone cares about money.
Yeah.
And
you need money. Like a government needs money, church needs money.
Yeah. And whether you're forced to give it as a taxpayer or you choose to give it because the leading of the Holy Spirit, typically people still care about where that's going.
Yeah.
And that's stewarded properly.
That's a good word.
And I think that's where a good government or even just good business entity will ensure that they are good stewards of the money they receive. And I think for us as pastors, that's essential, and to continue to think of it as stewardship.
Yeah.
Other similarities, like we touched on the checks and balances. We might have a board in a church or a nonprofit. There's an elected governing body for a government, a local government. One thing I think that we could carry over from a business or government side is auditing and regular auditing.
All right.
And it doesn't have to be as frequent as what we see. We do it every year at work. It's an outside agency. But I think it wouldn't.
Are you required to do that in your work?
Yeah, by law.
Yeah, by law. Because churches are not. But you suggest that they do this anyway, or?
I think it would be a good practice to at least investigate and determine an interval. But that would also help with the transparency, with the confidence in the stewardship. It costs money, so obviously there's a balance there, like we're talking about. But it's not something I hear a lot in terms of nonprofits or churches doing.
Do you hear it? Are you familiar with any churches that do that?
Not off the top of my head.
Oh, wow. Nick?
We've done an audit once, yeah. And that was when I first came in. It was to make sure that everything was cool.
Okay.
And but yeah, there are checks and balances you got to have in place.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the scary thing about a lot of ministries. And you hear it all the time, like in the news and stuff. What are the pastors usually getting busted for? It's either sexual immorality or financial mismanagement. So that's something that I think could be good. I'm just thinking about it. It could be something that could be helpful to the church, not even just for like checks and balances purposes, but like what's happening here, what's going on, and from an outside perspective, are we kind of in those zones that we want to be? Yeah,
and just to reaffirm what you just said, that was the first thing that our pastor said when he started the church and I came on was there's two things that are going to stink this, and it's financial mismanagement or sexual immorality.
Yeah.
And I don't think that can be repeated enough in terms of a warning.
Yeah.
It's something to, a lesser credo, but still a credo to kind of live by.
Yeah. How do we put those checks in place though? Like, cause I think about some of the churches I know, and the tendency is especially in church plants, there's the strong lead pastor, senior pastor. And a lot of times, I'm just thinking about my own situation where we just planted 3 years ago. Like, you have to do everything. You have to be the accountant. You have to be the janitor. You have to be the AV guy. It's like you have a team with you, hopefully, but a lot of that responsibility falls on you. But that can be kind of dangerous going forward. Like, if you have all the control and all the eyes on the accounts, what do you do?
So, like, the current church I serve at is still, it's not a church plant, but it's relatively small, and we came in to kind of support the senior pastor, and one thing he's done all along and continue to do is he doesn't just have board members from within his church, but outside people that he trusts that are plugged in elsewhere. And then they've taken on some responsibilities that help provide that extra accountability including, it's not foolproof, but one of them is tasked with collecting from the tithe box. So he actually never touches it. He'll see the numbers in a
once
certain
they're
form.
entered into the ledger or whatever.
Yeah. And then with the church plan as a part of, we counted together. There's always at least 2, if not 3 people. We'd sign off. We'd record it. We'd make sure at different times that what was recorded from that Sunday was what was entered. So there are just little things you can do. To me, it's also just building the practice as a part of your character. And so it may not be a set standard operating procedure, but it's more just that extra signal in your brain says, hey, I need to be extra accountable for this, or at least let somebody else know that this has come in. So, there's been times where randomly, I'm sure we've all had it, where somebody just wants to give the offering or give a tithe or give a donation, and
you're not going to be like, no, we're not going to take that right now.
No, but you're out jogging, you're at work, you're out to dinner, you randomly run into somebody. And so, I'd either make sure to tell my wife or send a quick text to
like this person gave this.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
And so at least there's something.
I'd like to be out jogging. First of all, I don't jog, but I'd like to be out jogging and have someone just jog up beside me. Hey, you're a pastor of a church, right? Here you go. Ta-da.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Well, the jogging's prophetic for me too. So.
Is that hypothetical?
Yeah. That's good. No, I think it's important because, like I said, there's a lot of times when that can. And what I would say, even, and maybe Nick, you can comment on this as well, but a lot of times, speaking from a lead pastor, senior pastor perspective, you never think that you're going to be susceptible to this kind of thing. That's always the other guy that's dipping into the treasury. That's Judas.
Right.
But that's not me. But you realize a lot of the guys that do fall, and that's not just with the financials, and it's with that. So it's so important to have that checks and balance. You got people at your church, right, Nick, that are...
Yeah, I don't have anything to do with that stuff. In fact, if I even need something reimbursed, I have to go through a channel. It's like a process. So I think that accountability is really important. I think another thing that I think is helpful, like if you're talking about how do you raise money? Well, it gets back to a principle that Jesus taught us, right? Be faithful with the little bit you're given. You'll, be entrusted with more. And that's kind of what we've seen. So one of the things that we do is we do like financial reports to the church. I mean, you got to be wise with how much information you give about, especially when it's not just you on staff, but like other people, how much you tell everybody about how much who makes.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think that telling people that when they donate, their money is being used for the furtherance of the gospel, that engenders trust, which then helps people want to do more.
How soon in a church plant do you think guys should start doing this, like financial reports?
I think that, you choose how much to share, but I think maybe from day one, you say, well, here's how much we need to operate. The other thing is that when people know that there's a need and they know what that need is, I think that communication about money is something that we could do well at. Yeah. I've seen it overdone. In our tribe, it tends to be underdone.
Yeah. We tend to not talk about money enough and then just say, well, leave it to the Lord and we'll get it figured out. But at the same time, we're planning everything else out. We're planning the ministry out and mission trips and building projects and all this and that. So,
Well, I think it also gives the church buy-in. It's a different way, or at least a different connection or feeling even to be participating in.
Yeah.
And I think it's still different than just giving on a Sunday. But when you have an annual report or end of year report and they see where it all went and how much it was furthered or how much it was multiplied, so to speak, I think that also helps them connect better to their part in the ministry. Yeah. And like I think you just said there, at least it made me think of it, it's also a way for them to clue in like, oh, maybe I could or should be giving more, and it's without us really prompting or doing a sermon on. It's just...
Yeah, they can see it for themselves. Like, hey, I'm part of this. Here's what our expenses are. Yeah, it's funny because we're coming up in we're moving into a new building that is too big. It's not too big for us, but the property is too big. It's more than we could afford as a smallish young church. And so I was joking around with one of the other elders at the church, and I was like, yeah, well, the property is only $10 million, so I'll just get up on Sunday and say, hey, we need $10 million. But, we joked about it, but then one of the other guys was like, that's not even a bad idea, because there might be someone there that God's put it on their heart that they have that kind of resource, and they want to invest in the kingdom in this way. So I think there's a good balance, and maybe you could talk about that, Seth, between how much need to share, and then, how much to kind of hold back and trust in the Lord. But I personally don't think it's an either or, like either you trust in the Lord or you're sharing the need for the church. I think there's a good balance to that.
I agree. And I don't want this to come across as trite or, I don't know, insincere, but truly I think prayer is kind of the start of most of what we do, and it can still be the start of what we do financially.
Yeah.
So praying in terms of our ways and how well we steward, but then also putting that in front of people. Hey, we're going to pray for this together as a church, and we want you to join in praying with us for this, and this is what the need is.
Yeah.
And definitely you don't want to do it in an insincere way where it becomes manipulative, and that's really more of a
I think that's what people are tired of, is the manipulation they see in a lot of these churches. It's like it's not that they're always asking for money, it's the way in which they're kind of doing it, with the sad music and because we lived on the mission field for 10 years. Nick, you were on the mission field, and we lived off support from sending churches and missionary supporters. And so we would tell the stories, and we would show what we're doing, and we would say, this is how much we need. And I didn't like it. It's like a thing that kind of grates against our American kind of upbringing. It's like, you got to work for your money and do it yourself, and you don't trust in anyone else kind of thing. But that's not the biblical way. I mean, that's not the way Paul did it and others. So, but then you get the other people that are like, they're like taking pictures of the sad kids, and, they have their Starbucks. They set the Starbucks down, run over to the sad orphan kid, take their picture, and then go back and, do their thing. So there's manipulation.
Yeah, sure. Slightly changing subjects.
I never did that with the Starbucks thing,
Never?
so just go on
Just
the record.
poor puppy dog guys.
Yeah.
I had some friends that they were actually going through seminary, and so I knew they didn't have a lot. But one small hiccup in our relationship was when I was doing some fundraising for a couple different organizations and inviting them to kind of come in and be a part of it. I always erred toward having them do something through service. And I thought that was a soft, gentle way of bringing them into it. And they actually got frustrated with me because they wanted to be able to give. They wanted to actually be asked to give, because it was a different way for them to participate and to be a part of what we were doing. And it was a ministry, it was a nonprofit, but still a ministry. And so again, that's some people's participation in ministry is giving.
Yeah.
And we deprive them of that if you don't
bring
talk
up
about
the
it
issue.
in healthy ways.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. How do you talk about giving, and how often do you talk about giving at your church, Nick?
So we have a thing that we say during announcements every Sunday, and we phrase it very purposefully. So we have this saying that we say where it's our executive pastor who makes announcements every Sunday. And so he says, when you're ready for giving to be part of your worship, then we have, boxes as you exit. We have, kiosks, and he goes through we have like 4 different ways you can give. And then he says, and that's how we encourage you to think about giving to the local church, that this is to further the gospel, and it is an extension or a part of your worship. And we say that every week. And then if it's in the passage that we're teaching, we'll talk about it. And then in addition to that, we do quarterly town hall meetings.
Oh, okay.
And so at those town hall meetings, we don't always talk about money, but oftentimes those are the kind of meetings where I can just be very candid with people. It's very unscripted, but we always have a time when we talk about staff updates. So for example, if we're wanting to hire a new staff person, I'll tell them, this is going to cost us this many thousands of dollars a year. If we do this, it's going to serve this community, it's going to serve your families. This is what this person will do. Here's where we're running into trouble. But listen, I don't have that money. And this is your church. That was a phrase that I learned from my friend Ed Taylor. And he always told me, remind the people, this is your church. I'm not asking you to give this money to me.
You're not giving it to me.
Yeah, I'm never going to touch it.
Yeah.
And I also don't have it to give. So if you want this done, like, we don't have these resources.
I like that, yeah.
But this is your church. If you want this done, then we will do it. This is our vision, and we're going to move forward. And sometimes we'll tell people also, we don't have the money for this right now, but we're going to take a step of faith. And I think that that's encouraging to them too, because I don't think it's good to send a message that says, we're not going to do anything unless you give the money.
Right, yeah.
I knew a missionary who did this. You know, he was a big newsletter guy. It's funny. You probably know, like, some people are really good at, like, doing ministry. Other people are really good at writing newsletters.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy was a newsletter guy. And I remember his newsletters be like, they were really often. And
I had a guy tell me one time, a picture's worth $1,000.
Yeah.
Well, this guy would be laughing, but anyway,
this guy would be like, well, you know, there's a lot of people in this community who really need us here. So
yeah. And if you don't give,
we're just gonna have to move home.
Yep.
And then he did move home. And what's interesting is that the people who stayed behind and took over that ministry flourished after that.
Wow.
And I guess my point is, we're going to do ministry and we're just going to trust God, but we also need to let people know that there's a need. And yeah.
This is your church. I love that. It's your church. If you want this to happen and these opportunities, were those? I like those town hall meetings. I'll probably talk to you later about that. But are they pretty well attended?
Yeah, I mean,
I can imagine.
Okay, let's put it this way. I'd say about a sixth of our church attends it. Okay. So we're a church of about 600, and regular attendance is between 100 and to 150.
Okay.
But we also have people who watch online.
Yeah.
So who watch the town hall.
Do you show the town hall online?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah. We do show the town hall online. It's not on YouTube. It's on our app.
So they have to know the church app and everything.
Yeah, and the other part of it is that a lot of people do watch online because we have 2 services, and it's after the second service. But our first service is the more attended service. So some of those people, they don't necessarily come back for it, but they'll watch it online.
I see.
And then at the end of the year, we do a financial report that goes out with the giving statements that get sent out, and that's a 1-page glossy front and back.
Yeah.
And
you have it like professionally printed and everything.
Yes. Yeah. And so it has some basic things, like here's the amount of money
pie
that
charts?
we gave. No, we don't do pie charts.
Man.
You like those?
Seth, do you like bar graphs?
Bar graphs.
You're a bar graph. He's a bar graph guy.
I
can
like
tell.
pie charts too.
Yeah, I could tell he was a bar graph guy.
We're more just like, here's a number. You know, here's the amount of money we gave to missions. Here's the amount of money we spent on outreach, that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So Seth, pie charts, bar graphs, that's all good. But you think it's a good idea to kind of give an overview of the needs of the church. And I really love coming back to what Nick said, just this is your church. So, what would you say is too much, though?
In terms of reporting or just
communication? No, just like money talk.
Going out of your way.
Yeah.
I like, I taught every Sunday for over 10 years. And to be honest, I probably even gave lighter attention to some of the scriptures that talk about money, because I have that same fear or that same extra bit of just
you want people to. I'm speaking for myself. You want people to like you and like what you're saying. So if you think a topic is going to bring someone to like I don't want to hear about this, you don't want to say it.
Right. I don't want it to be a barrier to entry, so to speak, or a stumbling block for somebody because they come in, it's the first Sunday they hear me talking about it. And I would always kind of preference it like, hey, this is where we're at in Scripture. And so we are going to talk about it, but we're not going to overemphasize it. We're not going to veer off in the other direction and talk about our building fund or something like that. And I think for our context, it was refreshing because it is an affluent community, and so I think people are used to being hit up. And then, this is definitely not for everybody, but my attitude kind of became, I'm already bivocational, and the Lord's providing, and it seems that the Lord wants me in that job, in that type of role, ministry and job, for the time being. And so at least for me, my prayer wasn't, hey, Lord, I eventually want to graduate to having a salary. And it wasn't even our prayer as a church, hey, we want our own building.
So even as the church grew and you were able to have a salary, that wasn't necessarily your ambition?
Not when I took over.
Okay.
And I think, again, it's not for everybody. And I was in that place, but there's just so much freedom. And it was just a beautiful thing to see what God did in our congregation in terms of giving. And we would invite ministries in, missionaries in, and see our congregation interact with them and probably give way more generously than possibly they would have in a different church context. And obviously I have no way of proving that, but just what I can look back on is just the relationship they had with those other ministries, and they knew where they were giving to, and they didn't feel constricted because they had to give to their local church. And again, I'm not trying to turn anything on its head. It's a different context, but just if it helps anybody or encourages anyone, it was a beautiful thing for me to be able to watch.
Yeah.
And see them participate and see how they connected with those other ministries.
Wow, that's good.
I like what you're saying there about having the freedom, especially in that setting. It is really freeing. And maybe you experienced this as a missionary in Uganda, because in Hungary, here's how it was for me. I didn't receive a salary from the church. And so I felt totally free to tell, and I would tell them that. I said, look, I'm teaching you this because it's the biblical principle.
Yeah. Not because
I don't
benefit
from this at all. So I'm going to not hold anything back because I have that freedom.
Yeah.
There's no way that you'll ever think that I'm saying this for my own benefit. I'm saying this for your benefit.
Right.
And I remember a saying that I picked up along the way, which I really liked. And it said that God teaches us to give financially, not because it's his way of raising money, but it's his way of raising kids. And we're his kids, and he loves us. And it's an important thing because money affects so much of life.
Yeah. And the truth is, if God's in something, he's going to provide for it. Whether the people sitting in the pews are giving or not, he's going to make a way. It really is for our own benefit. And people, they get hit up so much, like especially in your kind of communities, affluent, that they don't realize that it's not for us, the church or the ministry or the nonprofit, but for they themselves to see the benefit. Because Jesus said it's more blessed to give than receive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So dig deep. Dig deep. What about passing offering bags or offering buckets? I went to a church that had an offering bucket. The bag's not big enough.
Yeah.
What do you think?
At some point, we were small. At some point, we just didn't want to put the labor into it.
You didn't have the manpower?
And so we just lived in the back, and God still provided. Our current church, it's just a box. And I've seen that a lot, where it's just
the tithe and offering box in the back of the sanctuary kind of thing.
And now with online giving, I mean...
Yeah.
Well, so I was at a large church recently, and they only do online giving. And so the way they did it is in that part of the service where they used to be like, okay, now we're going to pass. Yeah. They literally said, okay, now we're going to pause and everybody do your online giving at the same time.
Whoa!
Yeah. And they put a thing on the screen.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
totally. And it was a big church?
It was a big church. Yeah.
My goodness.
So we don't do that. We don't do,
I live in a retirement community, so we're, it's, a lot of people may not know how to do that.
So
Cut that out of the episode.
We don't pass the bag or a plate or anything, but we've kind of talked about maybe we should, and then we didn't. But I'll tell you what, during the pandemic, it was to our benefit that we had never done that because a lot of our giving was done online, and it was set up with recurring donations. Where I had friends whose churches they said the majority of their giving was done physically.
Oh wow!
And those churches, they had a harder time because then they had to go.
It was hard to transition on the fly like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, full disclosure, we've done churches where our church now has offering boxes, at convenient places. We have a sign that says 3 ways to give. You can text, you can do it online, you can give in the offering box. So we don't pass the bag or the plate or whatever. But the church that we did in Washington, we did pass we had the bags with the nice handles on them and everything. Well, and people like it too. I mean, it's kind of the way that it's always been kind of done traditionally in churches, especially the older generation. It's like a way that they worship during the song, the bags are passing, that kind of thing.
Well, I think that hits the nail on the head. I think it can be another, if you still do that and you teach alongside of it, it can be a contemplative moment. It can be a meditative moment for the Lord. It can be truly an act of worship that's more tangible to that individual than hitting pay online.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Or not even hitting pay, just having set up automatically. I mean, it's like...
Well, yeah, I had a guy in my church, because we were really encouraging people one time to set up recurring donations. Yeah. And he's like, but for me, the act of doing it is like a sacrifice that I feel like it's like a...
It's a moment of worship. It's like a prayer time almost. Yeah, that's a good point.
And so he was like, I don't like that because then I don't feel it, and I want to feel it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. And just getting the cash and doing the cash, it's like, whoa.
Or
it becomes real. And writing out a check. You're writing a check out. Yeah, we still do have people that write out the checks. Online I think it's just better in every way just because the technology, and it's so much easier. And for me, I would forget, I love bill pays online and everything. And I know tithing is not just like another bill pay, but it's the same kind of...
I did hear a statistic. I don't know if it's still true or if it's just something that's outdated now, but this person who I heard this from said that when you do pass a plate or a bag, that you see like 15 or 20% more giving. So churches that do that tend to get more in donations.
Yeah.
So
it's probably just because of the opportunity point. I mean, you're literally, the bag is, you're passing it in front of you. And when I worked at Maranatha Chapel with Ray Bentley in San Diego, they did pass the bag at every service, whatever service it was, just because they believed, and I think we believe too, that it's an act of worship. It's an opportunity for them. And then they would talk about it and pass the bag and pray over it, and that was that. But coming back, a couple more things, and then we can be done, Seth. You're almost done.
I'm finally getting my breathing there. I don't know how you're going to edit that
out. Or you're just thinking, and you're meditating. But I was curious about when it comes to nonprofit organizations, non-church kind of thing, because a lot of churches, they do fundraising before they go out. There's different methods of doing it. Nick and I have talked about this before, but a lot of times they'll do a fundraise and get an amount to cover a year, 2 years, whatever it is, even including salary and everything.
Right.
And do fundraisers and things like that. In your nonprofit world, what have you found? I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this question. What have been the most effective ways to fundraise? In a biblical framework.
Starving puppy dogs. No, I'm kidding.
No, in a non-manipulative way. I should say.
I think it's relationship, right? But beyond that is helping people connect to the need, helping people understand what they're doing, and so it's not that different from a church setting. Showing the stewardship, showing the impact they can make through that giving. So from one of their organizations was a pregnancy clinic. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a dinner, and it was a Christian organization, and it was, here are some of the needs. And so we would do a fund the need, but then we'd also just, hey, here's a time of prayer. And if you're willing to partner with us and continue to do this work, pray and fill out this form and make a pledge. But in between that, it was testimonies of some of the women and some of the fathers who'd come through, their stories, how they were impacted. It was even stories of the caregivers, the mental health workers, the nurses that would interact with them.
Stories, yeah.
But again, I don't think it's ultimately that different between that setting and what we do in ministry. Especially when you look at it as they might not be, sharing the word alongside you, and they're not called to that. They're called to be a part of the church and give in the ways they can.
Yeah.
And so connecting them with the testimonies and with the ways that God's using the church is vital.
It's like those town hall things where they get to see what's going on, see kind of where the money's going. I really like that. I think it all comes back to prayer, though. I really like what you said about prayer, that's kind of the first place, because God provides in crazy, miraculous ways. It's not always like the world's ways. And we can learn from that, obviously, as we've talked about. But I remember when we started the church in Washington, we had some money from Maranatha Chapel sent us out, and they did a year and a half. They covered a year and a half. Yeah, which is awesome. A lot of churches don't do that. But if you're a senior pastor out there of a larger church, let's support those church planners.
Amen.
Let's make it 2 years. Come on. And when we were in Uganda, there was a church that they used to say, all right, dig into your pocket and pull out the money. And then they would pull out the money and they wave it around. And then they say, all right, now dig into your neighbor's pocket and pull out the money. If they didn't get enough at the first pass, with the buckets, they'd pass it right back through. Nope, not enough. Let's fill it up. But starting with prayer, so when we were in Washington, that we still needed to develop a congregation, and it's God's timing. You don't grow the church, God does. And there was a family that said, hey, we want to take you out to dinner. We went out to dinner. And, we had not talked about money and that kind of, we did it kind of in the sense that you said, Nick, where we kind of mentioned it during the service. But they took us out, and the guy said, asked a few questions, like they do when they're coming to a new church, like, what do you believe about this? And how do you feel about that? And and wrote a check, $30,000, and said, we really believe in this, and just gave me the check. And it was like, whoa. And I texted, I got a check. No, I actually did text the other guys that we were helping start this church. And, it's just those kind of stories happen again and again. I'm sure we have a million between the three of us of just God provides in ways that we don't expect. And, we make the need known, and we do town halls, and we pass the offering bag or have online giving. But at the end of it all, it's like God's the one that's going to provide for this. Mm-hmm. And he's going to do it in his own weirdly unique way.
Yeah.
Not to be disrespectful or anything. Nick, a few last words that you have for our show today?
Yeah, I think that ministry doesn't have to be money dependent. I think that's number one. We do ministry no matter what. Obviously, Jesus didn't need money. He did his stuff without money. But I always tell people at the church, listen, if we have more resources, we can do more things. And I want to do more things for the kingdom. And so I think if you have the right attitude about it, and the right, spiritual approach to it, it's not something that you need to shy away from. And Jesus talked about it a lot because what we do with money reveals a lot about our values. So I wouldn't shy away from it at all. And but think about the things that engender trust. So when people are giving money, it generally follows two things. One is vision, and the other one is trust. In other words, you have a vision that they're getting behind. They can see that this money is going to be put towards something, and then you handle it in a trustworthy way. Yeah,
that's great. Seth, what do you have? Last words? And you've done great, man. This has been great. What are your final encouragements?
I'd say similar to Nick, not just in dealing with money in front of the church, but you're modeling and you're exemplifying it for your flock. And I think that's also of great importance. And then, as stewards, it's another way of being obedient. It's such a simple way of being obedient to the Lord, both in how we pastor and how we teach, but then also how we model, or if we're on the other side of it, how we give. And I don't mind the idea of passing the plate again, because to me, it is an act of worship, and it is an act of service, and it's an act of sacrifice. And that's all right up our alley when we think about what Christ did and what was modeled for us in the scriptures, and how the people were invited in to participate in the ministry from all along.
Yeah,
you go back to the Israelites in the desert, and so I think it's something we shouldn't shy away from. I think we need to have a healthy relationship with, healthy understanding, biblically backed, and do our best.
Yeah, good word. Nick, thanks for being on the show again.
Thanks for
having me.
Really
appreciate it. And Seth, great job. Thanks for being on the show. A lot of good insight.
I'll know if I did well if I get asked back.
Yeah, yeah, I consider it a standing invitation. So thanks again, man.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for listening. The Cultivate Church Planting Podcast is part of CGN Media, a podcast network that points to Christ. Check out cgnmedia.org for more great shows and ways to support the ministry.